Okay, in this video, we are studying Greek again, and this covers Dr. Gerald Stevens' Intro to Greek textbook, and it's chapter 10 on the subject of prepositions. So, I've been saying in the last couple chapters, I've been starting a lot of the videos saying this is a tough chapter, there's a lot of paradigms in this one. Well, some good news for you. This one's an easy chapter for most people. There's some vocabulary to learn, but no new paradigms. Prepositions are in terms of morphology. They're really simple. You learn them as vocabulary words, no new endings and all that kind of stuff. The tricky part about it will be just learning over time their function and how to translate them, because prepositions have lots of different translations. So, and that's something you pick up with over time. So what are prepositions? What this whole chapter is about. What are prepositions? Well, as he says on page 131, turn with me in your textbook there so you can follow along as I walk through, because I'll be referencing the chapter a bunch of times in this video. On page 131, he says at the very top, prepositions are intended to clarify the objective cases. Objective cases are, remember, you've been introduced to 5 cases, but we don't talk about vocative very much, but mainly 4 cases in the noun adjective system, and that is the nominative, which is usually naming, like subject, though not always. You get a predicate nominative. You have the genitive, which is generally the case of possession. You have dative, and then you have accusative. Dative we generally think of as indirect object. Accusative is direct object. These cases are cases of nouns or adjectives and how they're functioning in a sentence in relationship to the verb, which is where the center and all the action of a sentence is. So prepositions, what he means in that first sentence is that prepositions are words that are used to help define the cases, to help nuance the cases. Because if you could have a dative, which you think of, for example, let's say you have a dative and you think of that case as indirect object, but the truth is, even in English, a dative is much more broad than that. It can do a lot of different things. It can communicate a lot of different nuances and aspects. So prepositions come along, even in English. Prepositions are these words that we use in order to clarify what we mean by that case. You know, if we want to delineate in what the actual nuance is. Part of the problem, as in a lot of languages, English included, and it's the same in Greek, he's going to talk about this on page 131, is that over time, in Greek usage, prepositions got a lot piled up on them. They themselves became, you get one preposition that instead of just having one specific meaning, lots of stuff got piled up on it and got used in various ways. And so sometimes you're going to look at a preposition and go, gosh, I can translate that preposition 5 or 6 different ways, and the answer is yeah. And he gives a great example on page 131 where he gives an example of the word by from the English language. Okay, so to help us kind of grasp this realization that prepositions are meant to clarify the cases, such as genitive, dative, and accusative, but because they get so overused and used in various ways, over time they just get loaded with various meanings in its usage of everyday language, and they become vague themselves sometimes, and not all the time, but a lot of times. And that's as I said, the case in English. And he uses the example of by at the bottom of page 131. And the reason he walks through that is just to give you an example. So you think when you think of the word by in your mind, you get a sense of what that means, because you're you're an English speaker, obviously, and then. But the truth is, if you really were forced to think about it, if you were trying to teach a non-English speaker English, and you were trying to help them understand what the word by means, you would actually have to give them a lot of definitions, depending on its usage. So he gives some examples there. Sometimes by means location. He was by the seashore. I'm reading off of page 131 here. Another time, the word by could mean the means by which an action is accomplished. You will know me by my works. Means is a function. It communicates the nuance of how a verb is being accomplished. Go to the store. I'm going to go to the store. How are you going to go to the store? By driving, by riding a bike, by walking. Okay, so in those examples, by is a means. It's communicating the nuance of means, how the verb or the action is being done. In the first example, by could be location. He's walking by the seashore. Notice, by the seashore doesn't describe how I'm walking. It describes where I'm walking. Location. And you go, but wait a minute. So a non-English speaker would be asking, wait a minute, but that's the same word. By, B-Y. And you would go, yeah, it has different functions. It has different meanings. It's a preposition that's been loaded with all kinds of possibilities. And the same works for Greek. All these prepositions in Greek, over time, they carried on all kinds of various meanings. And that's what he's talking about, page 131. Now, on page 132 and following to page 134, those 3 pages, what he's going to do is in a chart form, he's going to give you the prepositions, and then in the Greek, and then he's going to, in the next column, he's going to give you the case, because each preposition goes, originally the prepositions only went with one case, because they were designed to define the case. But over time, some of them got used with multiple cases. So you'll see that some of them can be used. And what we mean by use, so for example, in table 10.1, the first one is ana. So what he's going to do, and this is I'm trying to help you to understand the chart here. So you have ana, that's your Greek preposition. Now, I should say this. I didn't say this in the video when we covered this chapter, but if you will look at page 38, you should see a picture looks something like that. Looks like a lighthouse. Now, you were introduced to the lighthouse concept. Dr. Stevens uses the lighthouse and this little chart at the bottom here to give you some visual understandings of the prepositions. And you've been learning the prepositions along the way in your chapter vocabulary, but largely in terms of direction. So in this picture, you first learn that if you look at that lighthouse, ana with the arrow going up, ana means up. So you learn the prepositions in terms of direction, because that's true. Ana can mean up. It can also mean a lot of other things. So you learn them first in terms of direction to get that meaning down. But what you're going to learn in chapter 10 is that these prepositions also have all of these other meanings. So notice, ana is a preposition, and we have, so to give you some examples in English, by, to, with, for. These are all prepositions in English. So these are the Greek prepositions. The first column is going to give you the Greek, and the next column he's going to give you the case. So the ana goes with accusative. In other words, what he means by that is you're going to get the preposition, and then the word that it's modifying, that it's coming right before, is going to be an accusative case. And you notice with ana, it doesn't go with any other case. So every time you see ana in the Greek, it's going to be followed by, unless it's being used for up and it's just by itself as a vocabulary word for up. But it's going to be 99% of that. It's going to be followed by an accusative. It's never going to be followed by a genitive. It's not going to be followed by a dative, or certainly not a nominative. It's going to be modifying or helping us to clarify an accusative, because accusative could be lots of different things. So ana is a preposition. Remember what he says on page 131. Prepositions are designed to try to narrow down the meaning. So accusative can have lots of meanings. Ana comes along, what happens in Greek, as with all even English prepositions, we add the preposition to clarify what kind of accusative we're talking about. And you see and he'll give a function. I'll explain that in a minute. Ana doesn't have a function. It goes with the accusative case. What are some of its possible meanings? Well, it can mean up in direction. It can also mean through or in a sense of a location or a position. And it also can mean a distributive idea. To each is the idea. Each. Okay? So that's the chart. He's going to, in that final right-hand column, he's going to give you a translation possibility. And you notice, you just look through the chart, so these prepositions have multiple possibilities. And the truth is, they even have more than, some of them even have more than what he's showing you here. They can be a little bit more versatile. This is the sort of first approach, getting the basics of it. So that chart, table 10.1, gives you all the Greek prepositions, their cases that they're going to be connected to, and how to translate them, some various translations. You go, well, wait a minute, so how do I know which one it is? So let's say I hit a sentence and I have ana with an accusative. I've got at least, and some of these have a lot more if you look through the chart. Look at page 134. Page 134, look at the bottom to the last one. Huper, bottom to last, it can go with, look at the next column, genitive or accusative. It can have two different cases following it. Then you look at the translations. I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 translations. There are 5 ways to translate huper. If it has a genitive, you can translate it as for, which is an advantage function, in behalf of, concerning. 3 different ways you can translate it if it's followed by a genitive. If huper is followed by an accusative, that's the one on the bottom of page 134 there, then it could be translated over or than. So you might be saying, well, how do I know which one it is? If I have Anna with an accusative and I have at least 3 there, how do I know which one? And the answer is context. Context is the only way to know. You have to translate it into the sentence, and this is how you're going to do this as an intro Greek student, even an intermediate Greek student. You're going to have to refer back to this chart a lot. This was my experience and most students going through learning and where you're at right now. And even in intermediate, you'll continue to do some of this. You'll hit the preposition. You'll locate. You'll see what's coming after it, and you'll have to make a decision. How do I translate this? And you'll flip back in your book, in your grammar book, and you'll look up the possibilities. I did this well into advanced Greek because it takes time to learn some of these. Now, over the years, when you translate enough, you get a feel for them. You get a feel for them. Like if I said, he is walking by the sea. You get a feel, like I don't have to go, okay, stop. What's the meaning of by? Like you just know it intuitively as an English speaker. You learn it along the way. And the same works with Greek. Over the years, I've gotten to the point where I've seen some of these so many times. I just know and I see that preposition followed by that, and I get it, and I read the sentence. I go, oh, this is how to translate this one, concerning or for or whatever. Sometimes it's more ambiguous, and even at this point in learning and going through Greek, for me, I guess about a decade now, I still have to sometimes have to look them up and go, okay, what are my possibilities? And sometimes they're ambiguous, and you have to make interpretational, exegetical decisions with some of them. A lot of them are clear cut. Some of them are more ambiguous. Context is the only way to know which one it is. Okay, so he gives you a bullet point on page 135. So when it comes to prepositions, always note the case of the noun constructed. What it means constructed is the noun that's following it. Always know the case of the noun constructed with a preposition in order to narrow your option for translation. So to know how to translate a preposition, you look at the case that's coming after it. How is it constructed? Is it accusative, genitive, whatever? You're going to look at your chart until you learn them. It'll take a while, years for a lot of us. You'll look at your chart and you'll have your options. And then based on context, that narrows it down. Then based on context, you decide amongst your options. That's the process. Notice you've got to know the case. You've got to be able to locate that noun. And then you've got to be able to, and then you narrow down your options and make decisions. So what he's going to do, that's it. That's prepositions. Notice it's vocabulary. It's learning the vocabulary with its cases. And then you're not going to memorize all that chart, table 10.1. You're not going to memorize it. So don't even try. What you do need to memorize is these vocabularies with their direction, like this means up, and then know its cases. So Anna is always with accusative. And I would say that's what you need to learn about table 10.1. Don't get stressed out and go, I've got to memorize all of the various translations with that. No, that's going to come with time. You're going to use this chapter as a reference. You're going to constantly come back to it. And so if you tag it or something, it's because you're going to constantly come back to it to look up your possibilities in the chart. All right, so that's prepositions. That's it. It's a vocabulary issue and noting the cases that come after it, and then learning to translate over time. So in table 10.2, he's going to introduce you to something. Now I'm going to spend a couple minutes on this. This is really important for as we lean into the rest of the Greek language, and you're going to get into verbal concepts. We're going to eventually find our way back into verbs and getting into some of the other tenses. This word group function chart, which he talks about in length in those final English chapters. You go to the end of your book. He's got 5 chapters on English grammar. He unpacks it there more. If you want to read more, you go there. But he gives you this nice little chart to help you understand word groups, okay? And you got to understand this grammar to get where we're going here. So let me kind of walk you through it. What he's going to say, and I'm not going to draw out the whole chart, but just so you understand, you have word groups at the top, okay? What he's saying is all word groups groups of words, right? Not a single word, but when I get more than one word together, can be classified in one of two ways. They're either, and you see this chart there, table 10.2, they're either clauses, they're either a clause or they're a phrase. These are two types of word groups, the only two types. Every word group, anytime you get a group of words together, it's going to be one of these two types. Now, if it's a clause, that means it's a dependent or an independent sentence. That means it has a subject, period. And then he puts in parentheses here, subject. What's the difference between a clause and a phrase? Simple. Phrase has no subject. It's a group of words with no subject. A clause is a group of words with a subject. In other words, we call this a sentence. A sentence is a subject with a verb, at least. It could have an object, doesn't need to. He ran is a sentence. It's a clause. It has a subject, he. It's a word group. It's at least two words, and it has a verb. He ran. It's a full sentence. Now, there are two types of clauses. We call it dependent and independent. Independent clauses are what we call full sentences. He ran to the store. That's a full sentence. It's an independent clause, period, doesn't mean anything else. A dependent clause is a word group with a subject, so it has a subject and a verb, but it's unfinished. It actually depends or leans on an independent sentence somewhere else to make sense of it. So let me give you an example. And they're usually triggered by conjunction. So let me give you an example. If I just walked in the room and said, because he had to win the game, you go, okay, give me the rest. Like, that's an independent clause. It has a subject. He had to win. This had is the verb. He had to win the game. That's a clause. It's a clause, but it's dependent because he had to win it. Now, if I just dropped the word because out and I said, if I walked in the room and said, he had to win the game, that's an independent clause. It's a sentence with a subject standing by itself. It's a word group with a subject standing by itself. It doesn't need anything else to be complete. Dependent clauses, they need some independent clause to be complete, but they have subjects because he had to win the game. Or if he had done his homework. He did his homework. He did his homework, it's independent. If he had done his homework, that's dependent clause. And both of those, notice, have a subject, he. Okay? The other kind of word group here is a phrase. Okay, a phrase is a group of words that has no subject, and there are two basic kinds. Maybe I will end up drawing this. I'm going to run out of space, so I'm not going to completely draw this out. But there are two basic kinds. And what do you call on this side? Preposition. I'm going to abbreviate preposition, and then verbals. So a verbal. A preposition is what we're learning about in this chapter. By driving, I've been using that example. He went to the store by driving. So if I just walked in the room and said, by driving, that's not a clause. That's no subject. It's not a dependent or independent. It's not a clause. It's a group of words, by driving. It's at least two. But it has no subject, so is it a verbal or is it a phrase? And in that sense, a preposition. It's a preposition because it has that preposition on the front of it, by the shore. If I said by the shore, there's no verbal idea in by the shore. You just have by the shore, and shore is a noun. So in that sense, that's a clear one, that's why I changed it. It's a preposition, okay? So it's a phrase, a group of words, three at least, by the shore, and they can be much longer than that, but it has no subject, okay? So it's just a preposition. And the other kind is a verbal, and there are two kinds of verbals, infinitives or participles. Infinitives are participles that are basically this: verbs that have changed its function in even in English, its look. We usually add ing to them. It's changed in order to function in the sentence as a noun, adjective, as an adjective or adverb or a noun. So infinitives and participles, verbals, as well as prepositions. All of these are word groups that don't have a subject and basically function in the sentence in either a noun sense, they're functioning as noun, like the whole phrase, or the whole verbal idea, participle or infinitive. Infinitive would be like to go. Participle would be like going. Okay? So those to go can function as a noun in a sentence. It can function as an adjective modifying a noun, or adverb and participle can do the same thing. So that you got to understand those kind of word groups, because in this chapter you're starting to get introduced to different things. You're getting introduced to the preposition or phrase and how that functions in a sentence. And what prepositions are going to do is modify. They're going to modify nouns. They're going to modify verbs in an adverbial sense. That's why you're going to get some of these. So for example, look at para on page 134 in table 10.1, the first preposition there, para. You can have it in a genitive, a dative, or accusative. Look at the function. It can be ablative, locative, or instrumental. Notice one of the instrumental translations, beside. Beside. That could be what, see, it's abbreviated ADV, that's adverbial of measure. In that sense, that prepositional phrase is actually acting like an adverb, modifying the noun. To what degree is the action being done? To what degree is measure? How much is the action being done? In that sense, that prepositional phrase would be functioning as an adverb. And that's what this chart is about. It's helping you understand how prepositions function in a sentence. So here's the other thing you got to know. He's going to say in 135, 136, compound prepositions can sometimes be added to verbs in order to compound, like we call them compound verbs. They add right to the verb in order and they change the meaning. And he gives you lots of examples. Not a complicated concept, so I'm not going to spend any time on it. But just know that you can get a verb, it'll trip you up because you'll learn a vocabulary verb. And then he gives you several examples there on the top of page 136. You'll get like ekbalo. You'll learn balo as to throw as a vocabulary word, and then you'll see it in the Greek text like this, and you go, I don't recognize that. Well, this is a preposition, ek, and it's been added to the thing. So now it's to throw out. Ek means out, so it's not to throw; it's to throw out. So sometimes Greek writers will put these prepositions right on the verb, and it will intensify or sometimes radically change the meaning of the verb. So you learn this as balo. You got to get a sense over time of translation that certain words, all verbs, when these are added, it somewhat changes it. Some are minor changes. This one's easy to spot. To throw, you're going to learn ek as out. So it's real simple to throw out. Some are more complicated. Some of them actually change the meaning of the verb, and you learn that over time. So that's what he's talking about on page 135, 136. He's going to give you slight spelling variations and explain that. I'm not going to go through that on 137. Here's the thing. By the time you get to 138, that's it. That's prepositions, what I just told you. That's all there is. And I could stop the video right here. But what he's going to do on page 138 and the next couple of pages is 138 and 139 is going to give you a little bit of extra kind of stuff. He's going to say, okay, if you want to go a little bit deeper into grasping prepositions as you're learning them and learning the cases that they go with, remember, learn the vocabulary of the preposition, know what ana and epi and dia mean in their directional sense, and know what cases they go with. You should know the cases. Okay, that's what you should be learning. He says if you want to grasp that a little bit deeper and understand the concept of translation, then you read 138 and 139. And one of the things he's going to say is that to remember, or with the interior case functions on the bottom of page 138, 39, I encourage you to read through them. He gives you some, first of all, the one-hit wonders, the helpful hints. These are just ways to help you grab that chart. For example, he's going to say there are 7 what he calls one-hit wonders. These 7 prepositions only have one case. They don't have multiple cases. So he's trying to narrow down the chart for you and trying to help you to learn and memorize it better. And that's what that's about. But in the section on interior cases on the bottom of page 138, what he's going to give you there is he's going to start to talk about the difference between syntax and grammar. So most of what you've been learning up to this point in this class, and most of what you're going to learn in Intro Greek, is what we call morphology, grammar, how words are formed. And that's where all the memorization comes in. And it can be very cumbersome. I try, and Stevens does try along the way, and throw in some syntax, sort of whet your appetite and keep you in the race of learning Greek. Because that's really where translation gets interesting and fun, and you start to exegete text, and you start to see things in the Greek you don't see in the English. And one of the things to sort of grab onto when you get, let me finish that thought. When you get in that concept of translation and the nuances of translation, that's what we call syntax. So most of what you learn in this class is grammar, morphology. Syntax is explaining how things function. So it's one thing to learn that dia means can mean through in a directional sense, sometimes because, but understanding that syntax and all its various nuances, understanding how it functions and all its various nuances, that's syntax. Okay, and syntax has a lot more to do with how words work together. We're getting into translational interpretational issues. And what he's saying is, when you get into prepositions, prepositions really is a syntax game. It's you memorize the word, but you got to get a feel for it in translation. So he's going to talk about syntax there and talk about the different functions. So for genitive, for example, for genitive case, this is the case of description or possession, but it can sometimes function in syntax. We're talking syntax here as ablative, which means you can have a genitive. It doesn't mean possession like his book, but it can mean more like an ablative of separation or out of, away from, and it's actually translated with a sense of origin or source. He was the son, for example, this happens a lot in the Greek. He was the son of, John, and that would be in a genitive case. And we might say, well, he's John's son. Well, in a sense, that's true, but we don't usually say like John owns him. What we mean by that is say when we say somebody is John, he's John's son, or he's the son of John, and put it in the Greek you put a John in that sentence in a genitive. What we mean is it's ablative, more like origin. He comes from John. John is his father. John brought him into being is the concept there. Not so much John owns him like a book, like an object. You go, well, it's in the genitive. Well, this is an example of syntax, and this is what Stephen's talking about, 138, 139. This is where you get into some of those nuances of translation, interpretation. So you can have a genitive. It could be possession. It could be ablative, and that's what he means by ALB or ablative in the function case in the prepositions. There are some prepositions that can functionally, they're going to look the same. The spelling's not going to change, but they're functioning more like ablatives and not possessions in those genitives. So you can have a genitive, you spot it, you go, oh, that's a genitive singular feminine, but that's morphology. Syntax is, how is it functioning? Is it functioning in a possessive sense? Is it functioning in an ablative sense? Does it have a preposition? That's syntax. That's interpretation, okay? And that's what we're starting to get introduced to here. And that's a lifetime of learning and working with the Greek. The more you work with it, remember, love the text and it'll love you back. The more you work with it, the more you're going to get a feel and a sense for how these things should be translated. So that's what, and then of course, on page 139, he not only talks about the ablative, but he talks about the dative. Dative expresses personal interest. We think of dative as indirect object, but it can sometimes be used in location or instrumental means. Like it could be, and that's what he means in that column on functions. So in table 10.1, so for example, page 132, look at anti, the second one. Under ana, you've got anti. My hair's all sticking up. Look at there. Okay, so ana and anti. So look at anti. You get it with a genitive case, and it could be used ablatively. In fact, it's always used ablative. So when you get anti, it's not possessive. It's going to have a genitive, but that genitive is not possessive. If it has an anti in front of it, notice the anti is narrowing that genitive down. So you think genitive possession, but if you have an anti in front of the genitive, it's narrowing the meaning. It's what prepositions do. And anytime you have an anti in front of the genitive, it's going to be ablative. The idea of source or origin or out of or direction. It's not really possession. Okay? That's why it's important to know your preposition with your case and function. So knowing anti is always genitive and it's always ablative, you're really beginning to understand the anti preposition now. Okay, so that's what he means. That's what he's getting at with with syntax on page 139 with the dative. It can be locative or it could be instrumental. Locative is like location, by the sea or something like that. And instrumental could be agency or means. And now here's what he's going to do. On page 140 and following, the rest of the chapter, he's just going to give you examples. He's going to give you the preposition, and he's just going to give you the chart, table 10.1, That's the same thing as 140 through the end of the chapter. All he's going to do is give you examples. So you're not 140 and on is nothing new. It's just the chart with examples. Okay, so look through some of those examples and you'll get some there. Now, what I thought I'd do, oh, also, two more things. What I thought I'd do is close out the video with a quick translation from your exercise, give you a feel for this. Also, before I forget, page 152, you get vocabulary 10. Notice that right column there on page 152, those are pronouns. Remember what I said in chapter 9? When you get into chapter 10 and 11 and onward, you're going to start to get pronouns. You're going to go back to chapter 9 and look at some of the pronouns. You're not learning all the pronouns at once. So in the preposition chapter, you're getting some demonstrative nouns and you're getting some of these correlative nouns. So what you want to do is go back to page 118, go back to page 121 and 122, and read those little sections. And because you're getting introduced to the pronouns as you go along. Okay? So last thing, and this is 2.1. Where's my marker? I thought I would just help you translate. So let's take an example here in your exercise. This is page 152.1. So you get this sentence. I couldn't write it all out in one, so I got this down here. So you're translating the sentence. Let's work together. Remember, use your vocabulary dictionary in the back of your book if you don't know a word. Here I've got a preposition, meta, and remember, you want to know what is the case. So if you don't know the case, you look it up in your chart. Table 10.1 is your friend at this point. So I'm going to look that up to know what meta is and to know its various cases. But I'm going to take these words here. I don't know if you've learned this word 3 yet. It's a numeral 3. I think it's shown up in your vocabulary, but if not, it means 3. So, or third. It's like a counting number. So, and then this, if you say you recognize the vocabulary word, you would go, okay, that's the word for day. But let's say you don't. Well, then what you're going to do is look it up in the dictionary in the back. Let's start with this eta and mu and epsilon. You're going to find it, and it's going to be day, and then you're going to locate it. So what is the location of this? Well, if you're going to look it up, you'll find out that this is the lexical right here. And this is how it looks in that lexical form. You go, oh, I've got a first declension eta verb here. It's a first declension verb. And so I look at these eta pure verbs and I go, well, what's that alpha sigma? It could be two things. If you remember your eta paradigm, it could be genitive or it could be accusative. Now, in this case, with meta, could go with either one. So in this case, it's going to be accusative. So I'm going to look at this one, accusative, feminine, plural. So that's what that is. So I've got days. It's plural. So I how do I translate this? And then if I look this word up, and I don't know again if you should have this in your vocabulary at some point. It means rise, to raise up. Now I'm going to locate. This is a verb, so I know my vocabulary right here. It's a verb. And I look this up, and then I locate it based on my OSA omen-endings. Remember, chapter 2 endings, chapter 3 endings, middle passive, and I locate this as a present passive indicative, third singular. So it's my etai, my, oh, and there's my ending, first person singular. So it's I am rising. I am rising. Or something like that. I'm sorry, this is passive. So my is passive. So I am being. If I remember, I'm putting it in present tense. Durative. I am being. It's not the right present. I am being raised. So I am rising. I was translating active, but this is a middle passive. So it's I am being raised. Okay, so that's how we put it in the passive. So this is a present middle indicative, first person singular. So I'm going to translate it. I am being raised. And how did I know that? I looked at my vocabulary. I thought about my endings. I parsed it out. Now, so how do we do this meta? So I am being raised, meta, third day. How do we translate it? And if I don't remember, I look back at my chart. 10.1, I find meta, which is the bottom page 131. I go up. It can go with a genitive. It can go with an accusative. If it's an accusative, there's only one option, and it's adverbial of measure, and I translate it after. And there we go. And it's adverbial, which means this entire thing is a prepositional phrase. It's a word group with no subject, and it's functioning as an adverb for raise, and it's telling the measure. It's counting. It's after 3 days. It's saying something about the raising, and it's telling us a degree of measure in terms of time. In terms of time. So that's what we mean by adverbial of measure. This entire thing is acting like an adverb, modifying the verb. That's what adverbs do. So it's a prepositional phrase, a word group, the whole thing functioning like an adverb, modifying being raised. And I would translate this, I am being raised after 3 days, something like that. All right, so that's an example of 2.1 from your exercise. So go ahead and work through those exercises, and we'll talk about them in class.